Hi, this is Mary from the Daily Sew. Choosing the right size starts with accurate measurements. So this video is going to show you what measurements to take, how to take them accurately, and then we're going to go over the things you need to consider when choosing which size to use. We're also going to go over some flat pattern adjustments and sewing a test garment or muslin. So if you're ready, let's go. To take your measurements, you're going to need a tape measure, a mirror to stand in front of, and something to record your measurements with. First, strip down. You don't measure over your clothing, but rather your everyday undergarments, the things you will be wearing underneath the garments. Stand in front of the mirror. It's important to keep your stance consistent when measuring yourself. Stand straight with your arms and elbows down and relaxed. Stand still when taking your measurements. Take a deep breath in, breathe out, and then take your measurements to be sure you're not holding any tension in the shoulders or elsewhere. Measure the high bust. This is under the arms and over the bust apex. The apex means the fullest point. The high bust measurement helps you determine your cup size and gives you a more accurate indication of what size you need to fit your shoulders and neck area. A lot of times you will plug in the high bust measurement for the bust measurement on the pattern chart, and you may still need to make some fitting adjustments, but it's a great place to start. Full bust. Measure the fullest circumference of the bust. Check a side view to make sure the tape measure is parallel to the floor. Waist. Measure your natural waist. This is where, if you lean to the side like a teapot, your torso bends. It's usually slightly higher than the belly button. Check that the tape measure is parallel to the floor when you make this measurement. Hips. Measure where your bottom and hip area is the largest circumference. Again, the tape measure should be parallel to the floor. Distances. Measure the distance between the mid-shoulder to the full bust, the distance between the full bust and the waistline, and from the waistline to your hip line. This tells you if an area of your torso is going to be longer or shorter than the pattern. Shoulder width. You're going to measure across the shoulders from the low point on one arm to the low point on the other arm going behind the neck, especially if you suspect or know if you have narrow or broad shoulders. You want an accurate measurement of how narrow or how broad. Measure any area that you have problems fitting. Maybe you have muscular biceps and you frequently find sleeves are too tight. Measure the circumference of the fullest area in any area you have trouble fitting. The same goes for length of any area that is frequently too long or too short on you. Anything that you usually have trouble fitting, be sure to measure it. So just as clothing sizes vary from brand to brand, sizes for pattern companies also vary from brand to brand, with the exception of the big four. That is Vogue, Buttrick, Simplicity, and McCall's. They all use and share the same standardized size chart, and they've been using that for a very long time now. This standardized size chart is based on an average of people's measurements in the geographical region where the company is based. So in this case, North America for the big four. And this is why a size medium in a North American pattern is going to vary greatly from a size medium in, say, a company from Asia. Independent pattern companies, also known as indie patterns, don't use a standardized size chart. They can base their measurements, their sizes, on an average of their target audience, but more than likely, they're basing their sizes and their patterns on the pattern designer's own body. Your measurements are probably not exactly average or identical to the indie pattern designer's body. And even if you are perfectly average or you have the exact measurements of that indie pattern designer, your shape is going to be different. You might have longer legs, wider rib cage, a drop shoulder, a forward head, or a very straight back. Factors like your height, your cup size, your shoulder width, your shoulder slope, the depth of your rib cage, your skeletal size, and your musculature are going to greatly affect how things fit you. But there are some general guidelines. Generally, if you are sewing a pattern for a pants or skirt, you want to pick your waist size to find that starting size. If your hips are 2 sizes or more larger than your waist, choose your hip size to find the size that you want to start with. Now, if you're in between sizes and you want a closer fit or you are small boned, choose the smaller size. If you want a looser fit or if you're large bone, choose the larger of the two sizes. If you're sewing a pattern for a jacket, top, or dress, you want a size that's going to fit you in the shoulders and the bust because this is where that type of item hangs from, right? It hangs from your upper body. So you'll select a size based on the full bust or the high bust depending on which size cup this pattern is drafted for. The big four, that's Vogue, Buttrick, McCall's, and Simplicity, they draft for a B cup. If you are not a B cup, you will get a better fitting garment if you substitute your high bust measurement for bust measurement on the pattern chart. This size is going to fit your shoulders, your upper chest, your arm's eye, your neckline more accurately than if you choose a pattern based on your full bust. The pattern adjustments for the upper chest and shoulder area are much harder than doing a full bust or a small bust adjustment. Some patterns come with different front bodice pieces drafted for different cup sizes, and they're going to tell you which measurements to use in order to pick the right size. After you choose what size to use based on your high bust or full bust measurement, and if it's pants you don't need that bust measurement at all, then you got to see what size on the chart you're going to use for your waist measurement and your hip measurement. Most people, the majority of people, find that they are not a straight 10 or 12 or 13, whatever the size are. They'll find that they are one size in the bust, another size in the waist, and maybe even a different size in the hips. This is completely normal. Just write down what size you need for each area, and if it's a multi-size pattern, this is going to be really easy to fix, and I'm going to show you that in a little bit. But for now, choose the size or sizes you need based on that pattern's size chart. Although a lot of patterns will give you the measurements of the finished garment, it's always good to measure the flat pattern in key areas and compare those with your body measurements. Because everyone carries their fullness and their length in different places on their body. The flat pattern measuring can help you make sure that the pattern is going to be big enough or long enough or short enough in those areas. To take the measurements from a flat pattern, you're going to lay that pattern flat and measure from cutting line to cutting line for your size, and very importantly, subtract the seam allowances from that distance. Or you could draw in the seam line on your pattern and measure from seam line to seam line. But don't measure any extensions beyond an opening, like a center front extension or a built-on facing. And don't measure darts or pleats. You can either fold these out of the pattern before measuring or measure up to the dart or pleat, jump over it, and carry on measuring the other side. Remember, if the pattern piece is cut on the fold, that's only half the distance, and you have to measure all the pieces that make up that area and then add those results together. For example, if I'm measuring the thigh area, I have to measure the front leg pattern and the back leg pattern at the same height as where my thigh is fullest. So I'm going to measure up or down from the side seam notches to know that I'm measuring at the same location. Then I'm going to add these two distances minus any seam allowance to know if the pattern needs extra room to fit me or not. I also check the distance between the mid-shoulder to the bust, from bust to waist, and waist to hips or hem. Many of us are longer or shorter than the pattern in a different location than the pattern's lengthen or shorten line. Or we find that we need to raise or lower the bust dart to be at a better height. Once you have the flat pattern measurements, you can compare them to your body measurements. It's very important, though, that your pattern is slightly bigger, at least slightly bigger than your body, unless you are making a tight-fitting stretch garment. You cannot make a garment the exact size as your body and expect to be able to move freely in it. Now, if it's high stretch fabric, it can actually be the same or even less than your body's measurement because it's the high stretch of the fabric that's going to allow movement and not the style. You need some extra room beyond your body's measurement added to the pattern piece so that you can move in the garment. You'll need even more fabric, more room, to obtain a certain style silhouette. This extra fabric, both for movement and for stylistic purposes, is called ease. The minimum amount of fabric added to the body so that you can sit down and raise your arms and do all sorts of things is called wearing ease. Design ease is the additional amount on top of the wearing ease added to a pattern piece in order to give a garment a certain style. Design ease is going to affect your drape, your silhouette, and the fit. For example, in the 1990s, extra large jeans were in style. This very loose leg and seat silhouette gave a relaxed appearance. It was not a serious look. The amount of extra fabric was beyond what was needed for that body to move and sit. Skinny jeans are the opposite. They have minimum ease added and use a high stretch denim to allow for sitting and for the foot to go in and out of that tiny leg opening. Because fashion is an art and not a science, there is no rule or limit on how much design ease can be used. The designer has creative freedom, and when you sew your clothes, you are the designer. Besides the photo on the pattern cover giving you a clue to how loose or tight the garment's going to be, sometimes a pattern will include a description of the amount of design ease that has been added. Terms like semi-fitted or loose, those are talking about design ease. You have to decide how much ease that you like in your clothes and how closely you want to follow the design style. If you choose a smaller size because it's a loose design, your final garment could look very different than the intended fit. I have done this exact thing. I took out too much width from the pattern and ended up with a pair of pants that looked nothing like the relaxed style that the pattern designer intended and that I thought I was sewing. And because design ease is built into garments, you could measure the clothes you like to wear. So your favorite clothes are going to tell you what kind of fit you prefer. And like comparing our measurements to the flat pattern, you can compare your clothes measurements to the flat pattern. So I can measure the waist or sleeves or bust of a garment that I like and that is similar to the pattern that I'm making. Then compare it to the flat pattern measurements in that same area. The garment has ease in it, and so does the pattern. So it's a little more like comparing apples to apples. Remember, since you are measuring the garment flat, you'll need to double the measurement for the entire circumference. So, okay, you've measured your flat pattern and you realize this pattern's still not going to fit. This is not a problem. In fact, this is absolutely normal. It's super rare for anyone to cut a pattern straight out of the envelope and have it fit as it should. You are not the only one who has to make adjustments to a pattern to get it to fit. It's just how it is, and I cannot express that enough. So let's go over a few common adjustments that you can do to the flat pattern before even making a test garment. If you need to go from one size to another in the bust, waist, or hips, and you have a multi-size pattern, you simply draw a new cutting line that goes from one size line to the other. Make any curve smooth and always start and end at nothing on the original cutting line. So again, always make sure your lines are smooth. If you need to lengthen the pattern, you're going to draw a line perpendicular to the grain line across the pattern piece in the area that you need the extra length. This may or may not be where the pattern has placed its lengthen or shorten line. However, if you need to add length in the armhole area, it's easier to add it somewhere else and simply lower or raise the bust dart to where you need it. So you're going to draw two shorter lines straight across that line that you drew and or extend the grain line. Cut the pattern so it's now in two pieces along that first line that you drew. Tape one of the pieces onto a separate sheet of paper. Measure and draw over however much you need to add. Tape the cut edge of the other piece to this new line while matching those cross lines and the grain line. To shorten the pattern, you're going to draw two parallel lines the same distance apart that you need to shorten the pattern by. These lines are usually perpendicular to the grain line, but if the pattern has placed it differently, like this one, use theirs. Fold the pattern on one of the lines, bring the fold to touch the other line, and tape this fold closed. If the side seam or any kind of seam gets thrown off a little bit, go in there and smooth it out. Other common adjustments you can make on a flat pattern before you cut are a full bust adjustment, a small bust adjustment, moving the dart placement, and a forward shoulder adjustment. It is a truth universally acknowledged that 25% of your sewing time is working on the fit. Nobody wants to sew a muslin. Not even the people who end up making 3 test garments before they cut into their good fabric. But nobody wants to spend hours and days sewing, cutting $10 plus yard fabric only to have the final garment not fit them. You're not suffering when you choose to sew a test garment. You're putting in the time to learn how to fit yourself and have tailor-made clothing. Please learn from me and so many others. Invest the time up front to save on frustration and tears and make that test garment before you cut into your good fabric. Besides, sewing a test garment isn't as involved as sewing the final garment. There's a lot of shortcuts that you do on purpose. The goal is to test the fit, not to wear your test garment. First, choose a fabric with the same drape as the final fabric, your fashion fabric. This isn't always easy, especially with knit fabrics or thick coat fabrics, but a test garment in anything remotely similar is better than no test garment. Draw in the grain line with a pencil on each piece that makes the garment. This way, when trying on the garment, you'll be able to see if a piece is being pulled off grain, which usually indicates that you need to add some more fabric somewhere else. You can cut test pieces on the hem fold line or keep the hem allowance. Especially if you think you might need the extra length, do that and just pin up the hem instead of sewing it. Add additional seam allowance, especially to the side seams. If the test garment is too tight in an area, you can let out that seam and use the extra fabric in the seam allowance to adjust to a new seam line. Stay stitch any curves and bias cut edges so that they don't stretch out of shape while you make the test garment. You wouldn't think a neckline would stretch so badly so fast, but it will. And leave off the details of your test garment. You don't need to sew the pockets unless they are part of the front, but don't sew the actual pockets, just use the piece that makes the front of the garment. Also, sew the seams with a basting stitch. That's a long stitch. It takes less time to sew, and the longer stitches are easier to rip out if you need to change a seam. If you have a patch pocket, you can simply draw it on the garment to check the placement. You don't have to sew it on. Try on your muslin. Make sure you can raise your arms and sit comfortably. Be aware that sometimes we rush sewing a muslin, and this sloppy stitching can look like a fit problem. Whatever changes you make to the muslin, be sure to transfer them to the flat pattern and make notes for future projects, or if you're going to take time off between the fitting and sewing. And you want to keep these notes either on the pattern piece or on the instruction sheet where you will be sure to see them. Learning to fit is a process. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. Patience and practice is key. The best fabric and the finest workmanship are not going to compensate for a poor fit. I wish it could. In the description, I've put in the name of 3 books I relied heavily on for the research for this video. You may find these books as helpful as I do, although all 3 have a different approach to fitting. If you have any questions about this video, please put them in the comments below and I'll be sure to reply. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.